The grand ballroom's crystal chandelier threw dancing shadows across the marble floor, each facet catching the light like frozen tears. 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, filled the space, friends, family, and colleagues, all gathered to celebrate 15 years of what they believed was a blissful marriage. I stood at the center of it all in my emerald silk gown, the very one Darryl had once said made my eyes sparkle like precious jewels. How foolish I had been to believe his compliments still held any true meaning. The orchestra played a soft melody in the background as Darryl raised his champagne flute. His practiced smile gleamed under the warm lights. At 38, he was still devastatingly handsome, the kind of man who commanded a room just by entering it. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tuxedo impeccable, and his confidence radiated like heat from a fire. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed across the room, silencing all conversations. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate 15 wonderful years of marriage. The crowd turned toward us, glasses raised and faces beaming with anticipation. Our children, Pamela, 13, and Lawrence, 11, stood nearby, their faces glowing with pride for their father. They had no idea what was coming. At that moment, neither did I. But then Darryl did something that shattered my world into a million irreparable pieces. He walked away from me. His footsteps echoed across the marble as he strode toward the corner where she stood. My best friend of 20 years, Nicole. Beautiful, blonde Nicole, with her perfect smile and her designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Nicole, who had held my hand through morning sickness. Nicole, who was Pamela's godmother. Nicole, who had cried with me at my mother's funeral. Nicole, who had been sleeping with my husband for God knows how long. Darryl dropped to one knee in front of her, pulling out a velvet box that made my engagement ring look like a trinket from a cereal box. The diamond inside caught the light, throwing rainbows across the stunned faces of our guests. Nicole, he said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom, you are the love of my life. Will you marry me? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, hitting me like a physical blow. My legs felt weak, and my hand instinctively reached for the closest table to steady myself. Pamela's cry, "Daddy, no," sliced through the air like a knife, followed by Lawrence's confused sobs. But Nicole smiled. "Yes," she whispered, her voice carrying in the deadly silence. "Yes, Darryl, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, as they embraced while 200 people watched in horror, as my children's world crumbled around them, that's when I saw them. The front doors of the ballroom had opened silently, and 3 figures stood framed in the doorway like harbingers of justice. 2 police officers in uniform, their faces stern and professional, and between them, a man I hadn't seen in over a decade, Darryl's father, Herbert Adams. At 72, Herbert was still an imposing figure, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of presence that came from building a billion-dollar empire from nothing. His steel-gray eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with the calculating gaze of a man who had destroyed competitors with less provocation than this. Darryl was still on his knee, still holding Nicole's hand, when he noticed the sudden shift in the room's energy. Heads were turning, whispers growing louder. He followed their gaze to the doorway, and when his eyes landed on his father, the color drained from his face like water from a broken dam. The champagne flute slipped from Nicole's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a crystalline explosion that seemed to echo forever. Darryl's mouth fell open, his confident mask finally slipping to reveal the terrified boy beneath. "Dad," he whispered, the word barely making it past his lips. Herbert Adams stepped forward, his footsteps measured and deliberate. The police officers flanked him, their hands resting casually on their belts. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, sensing something momentous was about to unfold. In that moment, as my husband's face went white as snow, as Nicole's hand flew to her throat in a gesture of pure panic, and as my children looked between their father and grandfather with confusion and fear, I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. The trap had been set months ago. Tonight, it would finally spring shut. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we need to go back. Back to the beginning of the end, when I first discovered that my perfect life was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. 3 months earlier, I found the receipt by accident, or perhaps it was fate, I've never been sure which. It was a Tuesday morning in March, One of those crisp spring days that promised warmth but delivered only a bitter chill. I was rushing through Daryl's home office, searching for our insurance papers after Pamela had taken a tumble from her bike. The cut on her knee wasn't serious, but the pediatrician wanted to see her just to be safe. Daryl had already left for work. He'd been leaving earlier and earlier lately, claiming pressure from new clients at his law firm. I thought nothing of it at the time. After 15 years of marriage, I'd grown accustomed to the ebb and flow of his career demands. The receipt was tucked between the pages of a legal brief, a small slip of paper that might have been overlooked entirely if not for the restaurant's distinctive logo. Chez Laron, the most expensive French restaurant in the city. The kind of place Daryl and I had only visited twice in our entire marriage, both times for major anniversaries. My hands trembled as I read the details. Dinner for two, champagne, dessert. The date was last Thursday night. The same Thursday when Daryl had called to say he'd be working late on a major case and wouldn't be home until after midnight. $400 for dinner on a Thursday night when he was supposedly working. I sank into his leather chair, the receipt crumpling in my fist. My mind raced through possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Maybe it was a business dinner. Maybe he was entertaining a client. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But deep in my heart, in that place where wives store their worst fears, I already knew the truth. The sound of my phone buzzing brought me back to reality, a text from Nicole. Coffee later. Need to talk about something important. Nicole. My dearest friend, my confidant, the woman who had been there for every major moment of my adult life. We'd met in college, bonded over late-night study sessions and terrible boyfriends, and maintained our friendship through marriages, careers, and motherhood. She was the sister I'd never had, the friend who finished my sentences and knew my secrets. I texted back quickly. Can't today. Pamela's doctor appointment. Rain check, of course. Give my goddaughter a kiss from Aunt Nic. Love you. The words that had once brought comfort now felt like tiny daggers, because somewhere in my soul, a terrible suspicion was beginning to take root. I drove to the pediatrician's office in a daze, Pamela chattering in the back seat about her upcoming school play, while I fought to keep my hands steady on the steering wheel. The cut on her knee was minor, 3 butterfly bandages and a colorful band-aid, but I barely heard the doctor's instructions. My mind was still back in Daryl's office, still holding that receipt, still feeling my world shift beneath my feet. That evening, I waited until the children were asleep before confronting Daryl. He was in his study, as he so often was these days, supposedly working on case files. But when I pushed open the door, he quickly minimized something on his computer screen. Daryl. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to talk. He looked up, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt? Fear? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. What about sweetheart? He used the endearment he'd called me since our dating days, but it felt hollow now, like an actor reciting lines. I placed the receipt on his desk. This was in your briefcase. He glanced down, and I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. It's a business dinner, Ashley. The Wesleys. You know, the estate planning case I've been working on. Mr. and Mrs. Wesley? I asked. The elderly couple from Connecticut? Yes. He didn't meet my eyes. Daryl, Mrs. Wesley has been in a nursing home for 6 months. She has dementia. The case is just about her husband's will. The silence between us stretched like an impassable chasm. Daryl's hands moved to his keyboard, his fingers dancing nervously over the keys without typing a single word. I met with Mr. Wesley and his attorney, he finally said. We needed to discuss strategy. It was a lie. I knew it, he knew it, and we both knew that I knew it. Yet we played the game, as couples do when the truth is too terrible to acknowledge. Okay, I said quietly. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right. Everything's fine, Ashley. Just work stress. He turned back to his computer, dismissing me. You should get some sleep. You look tired. I left his office feeling like a stranger in my own home. The hallway that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed cold and foreign. Family photos lined the walls. Daryl and me on our wedding day, laughing children, holiday gatherings, vacations to the beach. All of it felt like evidence of a life that maybe had never been real. I found myself in Pamela's room, watching her sleep. At 13, she was beginning to look more like me. The same dark hair, the same stubborn chin. But she had Daryl's eyes, those deep brown eyes that had first captivated me in college. Would she inherit his capacity for deception as well? Lawrence's room was next. At 11, he still slept with his favorite stuffed elephant, the one Nicole had given him for his first birthday. He was Daryl's mini-me in so many ways. His confidence, his charm, his ability to make friends easily. I wondered if he would grow up to break hearts the way his father was breaking mine. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Daryl slept peacefully beside me. Or pretended to sleep. I was no longer sure I could tell the difference. The man I'd loved for 15 years, the father of my children, the person I had trusted with my whole heart, had become a stranger. But the worst part wasn't the lie itself. It was the growing certainty that this was just the beginning. My sister, Claire, has always been the practical one between us. Where I tend to see the best in people. She sees the world with the clear-eyed pragmatism of someone who's been disappointed too many times to count. At 41, she was 2 years older than me and infinitely wiser about the ways people could hurt each other, which is why, when I called her the morning after finding the receipt, she didn't hesitate to offer her services. "I'll follow him," she said matter-of-factly, as if we were discussing grocery shopping rather than surveilling my husband. "Claire, you can't. Ashley, listen to me." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You need to know. Not knowing is going to eat you alive. And you have those kids to think about. Whatever's happening, you need to be prepared." She was right, of course. The not knowing was already destroying me. I barely slept, could hardly eat, and found myself jumping every time my phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. The woman who had been my closest friend for 2 decades now felt like a threat, though I had no proof of anything beyond a terrible, growing intuition. Claire had experience with this sort of thing. Her ex-husband had cheated on her with his secretary, a cliché so painful it was almost funny. She'd hired a private investigator who'd provided her with enough evidence to ensure a favorable divorce settlement. She'd learned to be suspicious, to look for the signs she'd missed the first time around. "What if I'm wrong?" I asked, clutching my coffee cup like a lifeline. We were sitting in my kitchen, the morning light streaming through windows that Daryl had insisted we install during our last renovation. What if it really was a business dinner? Claire reached across the table and took my hand. "Then you'll apologize to Daryl for doubting him, and you'll have peace of mind." "But Ashley," she paused, studying my face, "you don't really think you're wrong, do you?" I couldn't answer, because she was right. Deep down, in the place where wives store their darkest fears, I already knew. The late nights. The sudden increase in business trips. The way Daryl had started guarding his phone like a state secret. The distance that had grown between us, so gradual I'd barely noticed until it had become a chasm. And Nicole. Nicole had been different lately too. More secretive, more evasive. When I'd asked about her dating life, she'd been divorced for 3 years, she'd become vague and changed the subject. She'd canceled our last 3 coffee dates, always with reasonable excuses, but excuses nonetheless. "I'll be discreet," Claire promised. "If I'm wrong, no one will ever know. I'll be watching." That Thursday, I dropped the kids at school and tried to go about my normal routine. I volunteered at the library, went grocery shopping, picked up dry cleaning. All the mundane tasks of a suburban wife and mother, performed with the mechanical precision of someone trying not to think about what her sister might be discovering. Claire called me at 3 o'clock. "Ashley," she said, and I knew immediately from her tone that my worst fears were about to be confirmed. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I was in the frozen foods aisle of the grocery store, surrounded by the everyday reality of ice cream and pizza, when my life imploded. "Tell me," I whispered. "He's at the Riverside Hotel, room 412. He's been there for 2 hours. She paused, and I could hear the reluctance in her voice. "Ashley, he's not alone." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Nicole." The word hit me hard. I leaned against the freezer case, the cold seeping through my jacket, and felt 20 years of friendship crumble to dust. Nicole, my maid of honor, Pamela's godmother, the woman who had held my hand during labor, who had brought me soup when I had the flu, who had listened to me complain about Daryl's snoring and his habit of leaving dishes in the sink. Nicole, who had apparently been sleeping with my husband. How long? I managed to ask. I don't know yet. But Ashley, they looked comfortable together. Like this wasn't new. I ended the call and stood there in the grocery store, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of daily life, and felt utterly alone. A woman pushed past me with a cart full of groceries and a toddler in tow. Teenagers laughed near the soda display. Life continued around me as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't just shifted off its axis. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember putting away the groceries or starting dinner, or helping Pamela with her homework. I moved through the evening like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of normalcy, while my mind reeled with the implications of what I'd learned. Daryl came home at 7:30, his usual time for a non-late night. He kissed my cheek, the same perfunctory kiss he'd given me for months, and asked about my day. I told him it was fine. He told me about a difficult client meeting. We sat down to dinner with the children and discussed Pamela's upcoming science fair project and Lawrence's soccer game. We were a perfect family tableau, except for the adultery and betrayal festering beneath the surface. That night, after the children were asleep, I found myself standing in our bedroom doorway, watching Daryl get ready for bed. He was brushing his teeth, the same routine he'd followed for 15 years of marriage. But now I noticed things I'd overlooked before. The way he kept his phone face down on the nightstand, the new cologne he'd started wearing, the gym membership he'd suddenly renewed after letting it lapse for 2 years. How long had I been blind? How many signs had I missed or rationalized away? Ashley. Daryl's voice startled me out of my thoughts. You're staring. Am I? I forced a smile. Sorry. Just thinking about tomorrow's schedule. He nodded and climbed into bed, settling on his side with his back to me. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep, or pretended sleep. I was no longer sure I could tell the difference. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and planning my next move. Because one thing had become crystal clear in the wreckage of my trust. I wasn't going to be the pathetic wife who confronted her cheating husband, only to be gaslit and dismissed. I wasn't going to be the woman who screamed and cried and made demands that would only drive him further into Nicole's arms. I was going to be strategic. I was going to be smart. And I was going to make them both pay for what they'd done to my family. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in a long time. I looked through Daryl's phone. He was in the shower, singing off-key the way he did when he thought no one was listening. The sound that had once charmed me now felt like fingernails on a chalkboard. His phone was charging on the nightstand, and for once he'd forgotten to flip it face down. My hand shook as I picked it up. The lock screen showed several notifications. Texts from his law firm, a missed call from his brother, and 3 messages from Nicole with heart emojis. The passcode. I tried his birthday, then mine, then the kids. Nothing. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure Daryl could hear it over the running water. Then on impulse, I tried Nicole's birthday. The phone unlocked. The betrayal hit me like a second wave. He'd changed his passcode to Nicole's birthday. Not mine. Not our anniversary. Not our children's birthdays. Hers. I scrolled through their text messages, each one a dagger to the heart. N. Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 412 again. D. Always. Told Ashley I have a client dinner. She doesn't suspect anything, does she? And no. She's too trusting. Sometimes I think she'd believe anything I told her. I felt guilty lying to her yesterday about coffee, but it was worth it for those 2 hours in bed with you. D. Only 2 more months until the anniversary party. After that, we can stop pretending. And I can't wait to see her face when you choose me. The anniversary party. Our anniversary party. The celebration I'd been planning for months, the event meant to commemorate 15 years of marriage, had been turned into their coming-out party. They were planning to humiliate me in front of our friends, our family, our children. I took screenshots of everything, pages and pages of messages dating back for months. For months of lies, of secret meetings, of them laughing about how naive I was. For months of planning my public humiliation. The shower shut off, and I quickly put the phone back where I'd found it, screenshots safely stored in a hidden folder on my own device. When Daryl emerged from the bathroom, a towel wrapped around his waist, I was sitting at my vanity, applying makeup with steady hands. "You're up early," he said, not really looking at me. "Couldn't sleep." I met his eyes in the mirror. "I keep having strange dreams about what the future holds." I turned to face him, giving him my brightest smile. "Our anniversary party. I have this feeling it's going to be a night to remember." Something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or excitement about his planned betrayal. "I'm sure it will be." After he left for work, I called Claire. "I need a lawyer," I said without preamble. "The best divorce attorney in the city. Money is no object." "Ashley, they're planning to humiliate me at our anniversary party, in front of everyone we know, in front of our children." My voice was steady, but inside, I was burning with a fury I'd never felt before. "I'm not going to let that happen." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if Daryl wants to play games, I'll play games. But I'm going to win." The lawyer Claire recommended was a woman named Margaret Chin, a partner at one of the city's most prestigious firms. Her reputation was legendary. She'd handled the divorces of senators, celebrities, and Fortune 500 CEOs. Her consultation fee alone was more than most people spent on groceries in a month. I didn't care. Margaret's office was located on the 40th floor of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, while expensive art and diplomas lined the walls. She was younger than I'd expected, mid-40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence that radiated from her dark eyes. "Mrs. Adams," she said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her massive desk. "Your sister mentioned you might need my services." I told her everything. The receipt, the phone messages, the anniversary party plot. I showed her the screenshots, watching her eyebrows rise slightly as she scrolled through the evidence. "This is quite damning," she said finally. "Your husband has been remarkably careless with his communications. That's good for us." "What are my options?" "Several. We could file for divorce immediately, seek emergency custody orders, freeze joint assets. Standard procedure in cases of adultery." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "But you don't want standard procedure, do you?" "No," I said firmly. "I want them to pay for what they've done. I want justice." Margaret smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had just spotted its prey. "Then we're going to need to be creative. Tell me, what do you know about your husband's family finances?" The question caught me off guard. "His family finances? Your husband's father is Herbert Adams, correct? The billionaire real estate developer." "Yes, but they don't speak. They've been estranged for over a decade." "Estranged, perhaps, but not legally severed. Do you know the terms of the family trust?" I shook my head. Daryl had never talked about his father's money. Herbert Adams had built his empire from nothing, starting with a single apartment building and growing it into a real estate dynasty worth billions. But he'd been a distant, demanding father, and Daryl had rebelled against his expectations early on, choosing law school over business school, independence over inheritance. The rift had become permanent when Daryl married me. Herbert had wanted his son to marry within their social circle, old money, established families, the kind of connections that strengthen business empires. A middle-class teacher's daughter didn't fit the bill. "I think you need to have a conversation with your father-in-law," Margaret said. "Soon. He won't want to see me. He's never approved of our marriage." "Maybe not. But I suspect he'll be very interested in what you have to tell him about his son's behavior." She leaned forward, her expression intent. "Mrs. Adams, there's something you need to understand. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. This is about your children's future, your financial security, and yes, about making sure the people who betrayed you face consequences for their actions." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that sometimes, the best revenge is letting people destroy themselves. Your husband and his mistress are planning to humiliate you publicly. What if we let them? What if we let them think they're winning right up until the moment when everything falls apart?" The idea was dangerous, risky. It would mean enduring weeks of continued betrayal, pretending ignorance while they plotted against me. It would mean trusting that justice would ultimately prevail. But the alternative, Confronting them now, fighting a messy divorce battle while they painted me as the bitter ex-wife, held no appeal. What do you need from me? I asked. Everything. Phone records, financial statements, social media accounts, witness testimony. And most importantly, that conversation with Herbert Adams. I left Margaret's office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since discovering the receipt, I felt like I had some control over my situation. I was no longer the naive wife, blindly trusting while her husband plotted betrayal. I was a woman with a plan. Herbert Adams's estate sat on 50 acres of manicured grounds in the most exclusive suburb of the city. The mansion itself was a monument to success, Georgian architecture with modern amenities, surrounded by gardens that required a team of landscapers to maintain. I'd been there exactly 3 times in 15 years of marriage. Once when Daryl and I announced our engagement, once when Pamela was born, and once for Herbert's 70th birthday party. Each visit had been strained and uncomfortable. Herbert tolerated me because I was the mother of his grandchildren, but he'd never hidden his disappointment in his son's choice of wife. I was too common, too ordinary, too far removed from the social circles that mattered in his world, which made this visit all the more nerve-wracking. I sat in my car outside the wrought iron gates, gathering courage, while speaking into my phone with Margaret. Remember, she said, you're not asking for his help. You're providing him with information he needs to know about his son's behavior. Let him draw his own conclusions about what to do with it. What if he doesn't believe me? Then we proceed with Plan B. But Ashley, I've researched Herbert Adams extensively. He's many things, demanding, ruthless, unforgiving, but he's not stupid. And he values loyalty above almost everything else. What Daryl is doing, it won't sit well with him. I ended the call and pressed the intercom button at the gate. Mrs. Adams, to see Mr. Adams, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a long pause. One moment, please. The gate swung open with mechanical precision, and I drove up the winding driveway toward the mansion. My hands were sweating despite the car's air conditioning, and I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. Herbert himself answered the door, which surprised me. He was dressed casually by his standards, charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, no tie. At 72, he was still an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. Ashley. He stepped back to let me enter, his expression unreadable. This is unexpected. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. He led me through the foyer into his study, a room I'd never been in before. It was everything I'd expected. Rich mahogany paneling, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, expensive artwork, and windows that overlooked the estate's prize-winning gardens. A massive desk dominated one corner, its surface covered with neat stacks of papers and financial documents. Please sit. He gestured to one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Can I offer you something to drink? No, thank you. I perched on the edge of the chair, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. Herbert settled behind his desk and studied me with those sharp eyes. You look tired, Ashley. Are you well? The unexpected kindness in his voice caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked if I was well? When was the last time my own husband had noticed I looked tired? I'm managing, I said carefully. And the children? They're fine. Pamela's thriving in middle school, and Lawrence just made the select soccer team. Good. He leaned back in his chair. I assume this isn't a social call. You've never visited without Daryl before. Here it was, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and met his gaze directly. Herbert, I need to tell you something about your son. Something you're not going to want to hear. His expression didn't change, but I saw his hands still on the arms of his chair. I'm listening. I told him everything. The receipt, the phone messages, the anniversary party plot. I showed him the screenshots, watching his face grow progressively darker as he read through his son's betrayal with my best friend. When I finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Herbert stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at his perfectly manicured grounds. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. How long have you known? He asked finally. A week. And you haven't confronted him? No. He turned to face me. Why not? I chose my words carefully. Because I have children to protect. Because a messy divorce serves no one except the lawyers. And because... I paused, then decided on honesty. Because they're planning to humiliate me publicly, and I think they should face consequences for that. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. What do you want from me, Ashley? Nothing, I said, surprising us both. I wanted you to know what kind of man your son has become. What he's planning to do to the mother of your grandchildren, so that whatever decision I take tomorrow, you will know my reasons. You can do with that information whatever you think is right. Herbert returned to his desk and sat down heavily. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked every one of his 72 years. Daryl has always been disappointing, he said quietly. Rebellious as a child, defiant as a teenager, irresponsible as an adult. But I never thought he was cruel. He is cruel, I said simply. What he's doing to Pamela and Lawrence, they adore him. They have no idea their father is planning to destroy our family for his own selfish desires. The anniversary party is next month, he said. 3 weeks from Saturday. Herbert nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the desk. Ashley, are you familiar with the terms of the family trust? No. Daryl never discussed it. Daryl is the primary beneficiary, with everything passing to your children upon his death. However, there are conditions. Moral clauses, you might call them. Provisions that allow me to alter the terms if certain behaviors are exhibited. I felt a flutter of hope. What kind of behaviors? Adultery, abandonment of family responsibilities, actions that bring disgrace to the family name. His smile was as cold as winter. Publicly proposing to one's mistress at his wife's anniversary party would certainly qualify. What are you saying? I'm saying that if Daryl proceeds with this plan of his, he may find himself cut off from the family fortune entirely. The trust can be restructured to benefit you and the children exclusively. The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. Daryl had always lived beyond his law firm salary, counting on his eventual inheritance to fund his lifestyle. Without access to the family money, he'd be financially ruined. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in my circumstances. An hour ago, I'd been a betrayed wife with limited options. Now, I was potentially the primary beneficiary of $1 billion trust. Why are you helping me? I asked. Herbert's expression softened slightly. Because in 15 years of marriage to my son, you've been a good wife and an excellent mother. Because you came here today not to ask for my help, but to do what you thought was right. And because... He paused, his voice growing quiet. Because I failed as a father. I raised a son who thinks he can betray and humiliate the people who love him without consequences. It's time he learned otherwise. What happens next? Next, you go home and pretend this conversation never happened. You plan your anniversary party. You smile and play the loving wife. And when Daryl and your friend reveal their true colors in front of everyone you know, they'll discover that actions have consequences. I stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. As I reached the door, Herbert called my name. Ashley, the children, Pamela and Lawrence, they are welcome here anytime, regardless of what happens between you and Daryl. They are my grandchildren. They'll always have a place in this family. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. As I drove away from the estate, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for my husband and best friend to walk into it. The next 3 weeks were the most difficult of my life. Every morning I woke up next to a man who was planning to humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about. Every evening, I sat across from him at dinner, watching him smile at our children while secretly plotting to destroy their family. And every day, I had to pretend I knew nothing. The hardest part wasn't Daryl's betrayal. I'd already processed that grief, worked through the anger with Margaret and my sister, Claire. The hardest part was Nicole. She called every few days, her voice bright with false friendship, asking about party preparations or wanting to chat about trivial things. Each conversation was torture, listening to her laugh and joke while knowing she was sleeping with my husband, knowing she was looking forward to my public humiliation. I'm so excited for the party, she gushed during one particularly painful phone call. It's going to be such a magical night. I just have a feeling something amazing is going to happen. I'm sure it will be memorable, I replied, my voice steady despite the fury burning in my chest. You sound tired, honey. Are you okay? The fake concern in her voice made me want to scream. Instead, I forced a laugh. Just part of planning stress, you know how it is. Well, don't worry about a thing. It's going to be perfect. Daryl is so lucky to have you. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried. Not from sadness, but from pure rage. How dare she? How dare she pretend to care about me while stabbing me in the back? How dare she call my husband lucky while she was stealing him away? But I pulled myself together, wiped my tears, and continued planning the party that would become their downfall. The guest list had grown to 200 people, Daryl's colleagues from the law firm, our neighbors, college friends, my family, Nicole's family, even some of Herbert's business associates had agreed to attend, though Daryl didn't know his father would be there. I told him Herbert was traveling abroad on business. The catering was arranged, 5 courses of elegant food that no one would remember after what was about to happen. The orchestra was booked, the flowers ordered, the decorations planned, every detail perfect for what Daryl and Nicole thought would be their triumph. I threw myself into the preparations with manic energy, partly because it gave me something to focus on besides my rage, and partly because I wanted everything to be flawless when their world came crashing down. The children helped with an excitement that broke my heart. Pamela designed place cards with beautiful calligraphy, chattering about how romantic it was that Mom and Dad were celebrating 15 years of love. Lawrence picked out his suit with the seriousness of a diplomat choosing formal wear, proud to be part of his parents' special day. They had no idea what was coming. I told myself it was better that way. They'd be shocked, but at least they wouldn't spend weeks dreading it. Still, watching their innocent excitement felt like swallowing broken glass. Mom, Pamela said one evening while we were addressing invitations, do you think I'll have a marriage like yours and Dad's someday? I paused in my writing, fighting back tears. I hope you'll have something even better, sweetheart. I hope you'll find someone who loves you completely and would never hurt you. But Dad loves you completely, doesn't he? I thought he did, I said quietly. I really thought he did. Pamela looked at me strangely, perhaps picking up on the sadness in my voice, but she didn't press the issue. Children are remarkably resilient, but they are also perceptive. I suspected both kids sensed the tension in our house, even if they couldn't identify its source. Daryl, meanwhile, was practically glowing with anticipation. He'd been working late even more frequently, supposedly handling last-minute case preparations before taking time off for the party. I knew he was actually spending those hours with Nicole, probably planning his grand romantic gesture. He'd also been unusually attentive to me, which was perhaps the cruelest part of all. Flowers appeared on my nightstand, expensive wine with dinner, gentle kisses goodnight. I realized with sick clarity that he was assuaging his guilt by being a better husband in the weeks before he planned to leave me. You've been so sweet lately, I said one evening as he rubbed my shoulders while I worked on party preparations. It reminds me of when we were dating. You deserve sweetness, he replied, his hands gentle on my neck. I know I've been distracted with work lately. I want to make sure you know how much you mean to me. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly, I almost believed he meant it. Almost. The party's going to be beautiful, he continued. You've outdone yourself with the planning. I want it to be perfect. A night we'll never forget. It will be, I said, and I heard the certainty in his voice. Trust me, Ashley. It's going to be a night that changes everything. If only he knew how right he was. 3 days before the party, Claire came over to help with final preparations. We were alone in the kitchen, wrapping party favors, when she finally asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you sure about this plan? She said quietly. It's not too late to change your mind. We could confront them privately, handle this through the courts. I tied a ribbon around a small box of chocolates with more force than necessary. They want to humiliate me publicly. They want to destroy our family in front of everyone we know, including the children. Why should they get to do that without consequences? Because you're better than they are. Maybe. But I'm also done being the good girl who turns the other cheek. I met her eyes across the table. They made their choice, Claire. Now they get to live with the results. She nodded, though I could see the worry in her expression. What about Pamela and Lawrence? This is going to traumatize them. What Daryl is planning to do is going to traumatize them. At least this way, they'll see that actions have consequences. They'll learn that you can't just hurt people without paying a price. And if something goes wrong? If Herbert doesn't come through? If the police don't show up? Then I'll handle it. I finished wrapping the favor and reached for another box. But Claire, I've spent 15 years being Daryl's perfect wife, supportive, trusting, never questioning, never demanding too much. And where did it get me? He thinks I'm so pathetic that I'll just stand there and smile while he proposes to another woman at my own anniversary party. You're not pathetic. No, I'm not. And it's time Daryl learned that. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to my husband, listening to his peaceful breathing, and thought about everything that was about to change. By tomorrow night, our marriage would be over. Our children's lives would be turned upside down. The comfortable routine we'd built over 15 years would be shattered. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time to stop living a lie. I slipped out of bed and walked through our house, looking at it with new eyes. The family photos lining the hallway. Would Pamela and Lawrence want to keep them, or would they be too painful? The furniture we'd chosen together. Would I take it to my new home, or would it carry too many memories? In Pamela's room, I watched my daughter sleep and promised her silently that whatever happened tomorrow, I would protect her and her brother. They would get through this. We all would. Back in my own bedroom, I stood at the window, looking out at the garden Daryl and I had planted together in our first year of marriage. The roses were blooming, their petals perfect in the moonlight. Tomorrow, everything would be different. But tonight, for just a few more hours, I could pretend we were still the happy family we'd once been. I climbed back into bed and closed my eyes, knowing it would be the last night I ever slept beside my husband. Tomorrow, the reckoning would come. The ballroom looked like something from a fairy tale. Thousands of white roses cascaded from crystal vases, their perfume mixing with the scent of expensive candles. The orchestra tuned their instruments while servers in crisp uniforms arranged champagne glasses on silver trays. Everything was perfect, down to the smallest detail. I stood in the center of it all, wearing the emerald silk gown Daryl had complimented so many times, and felt like an actress preparing for the performance of her life. In 3 hours, 200 guests would fill the space. In 4 hours, my husband would propose to my best friend in front of everyone we knew. And in 5 hours, their world would come crashing down. "You look beautiful, Mom," Pamela said, adjusting her own dress, a junior version of mine in soft pink. At 13, she was beginning to show glimpses of the woman she would become, and my heart ached, knowing that tonight would steal some of her innocence. "Thank you, sweetheart." I smoothed her hair, memorizing the moment. "You look beautiful, too." Lawrence appeared in his tiny tuxedo, his hair slicked back with more gel than strictly necessary. "Do I look grown up?" he asked seriously. "Very grown up," I assured him, straightening his bow tie. "Your father will be so proud." Daryl emerged from the bathroom, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled, his smile confident and bright. Looking at him, it was hard to believe this was the same man who had been systematically betraying our family. "Ready for our big night?" he asked, sliding his arms around my waist from behind. I leaned back against him, feeling his warmth, his familiar cologne, the solid presence I'd trusted for so many years. "Ready as I'll ever be." "It's going to be perfect, Ashley, I promise." If only he knew what I had planned for his definition of perfect. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp. I stood beside Daryl in the receiving line, accepting congratulations and well wishes from friends and family. Everyone commented on how beautiful the party was, how happy we looked, how inspiring it was to see a couple still so in love after 15 years. Nicole arrived fashionably late, stunning in a red dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payments. She kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming, her smile radiant with anticipation. "Ashley, you look absolutely gorgeous," she gushed. And this party, it's like something from a magazine. Thank you, I replied, my voice steady. I wanted everything to be perfect for tonight. Oh, it will be, she said, her eyes sparkling with secrets. I have a feeling this is going to be a night none of us will ever forget. Daryl appeared at my elbow, sliding his arm around my waist while extending his other hand to Nicole. Vicky, you made it. You look incredible. Thank you, she practically purred, her fingers lingering on his just a moment too long. I wouldn't miss this for the world. I watched them look at each other, and for a split second, their masks slipped. The heat between them was palpable, the intimate knowledge of lovers who had been sneaking around for months. Then they remembered where they were, remembered their audience, and the mask slid back into place. I should mingle, Nicole said brightly. But save me a dance later, Daryl replied. Always. And I wanted to slap them both. The evening progressed with painful normalcy. Cocktails and conversation, laughter and music, the comfortable rhythm of a successful party. I played my role perfectly. The gracious hostess, the loving wife, the woman celebrating 15 years of marital bliss. But beneath the surface, I was counting down the minutes until everything changed. At 8:30, I excused myself and slipped away to the ladies' room, pulling out my phone to check for messages. There were 3 texts waiting for me. From Margaret Chen. Everything is in place. Police will arrive at 9:15 sharp. From Claire. Herbert just arrived. He's in position by the back entrance. From an unknown number. This is Detective Morrison. We'll be at the front entrance at exactly 9:15. Are you ready? I typed back quickly. Ready. My hands were shaking as I returned my phone to my purse. This was it. In 45 minutes, my carefully orchestrated plan would either succeed brilliantly or fail spectacularly. I returned to the party and found Daryl holding court near the bar, telling a story that had his colleagues laughing. He looked so confident, so comfortable, so certain that everything was going according to his plan. Nicole stood nearby, her attention focused entirely on him, practically glowing with anticipation. At 9 o'clock, Daryl raised his hand to quiet the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for a moment. The conversations died away, faces turning toward us expectantly. I felt Pamela and Lawrence move closer to me, their small hands finding mine. The orchestra fell silent. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 15 wonderful years of marriage, Daryl began, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. He looked directly at me, his smile warm and apparently genuine. Ashley, you have been the most incredible wife, the most amazing mother, the strongest woman I've ever known. The crowd murmured approvingly. Someone in the back called out, "Hear, hear." But then Daryl did something that made my blood run cold. He stepped away from me. However, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Tonight isn't just about celebrating the past. It's about acknowledging the future. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw my sister, Claire, near the back of the room, her face tight with worry. Pamela's grip on my hand tightened. Daryl walked across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent ballroom. He stopped in front of Nicole, who was trying to look surprised but failing miserably. Sometimes, Daryl said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, life gives you a second chance at happiness. Sometimes, you discover that the person you were meant to be with was right there beside you all along. The gasps from the crowd were audible now. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, is he really doing this?" I saw my mother's face, shocked and horrified. I saw Daryl's colleagues exchanging bewildered glances. Pamela started to cry. Daryl dropped to one knee in front of Nicole, pulling out the velvet box I'd seen in his phone photos. The diamond inside caught the light and threw rainbows across the stunned faces of our guests. "Nicole," he said, his voice strong and clear, "you are the love of my life. Will you marry me?" The silence that followed was deafening. Nicole's eyes filled with tears of joy, not shame, as she looked down at the man kneeling before her. "Yes," she whispered, though her voice carried in the absolute quiet. "Yes, Daryl, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, as they embraced while 200 people watched in horrified fascination, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The worst had happened. The public humiliation was complete. My children had just watched their father destroy our family for another woman. But they had no idea what was coming next. The front doors of the ballroom opened with perfect timing, and 3 figures stepped into the doorway. 2 police officers in full uniform, their faces stern and professional, and between them Herbert Adams. At 72, Daryl's father commanded attention wherever he went. Tonight, dressed in an impeccably tailored tuxedo with his silver hair perfectly styled, he looked like an avenging angel. His steel-gray eyes swept the room, taking in the scene with the calculating gaze of a man who had built an empire by reading situations quickly and acting decisively. The murmur that went through the crowd was electric. Everyone knew who Herbert Adams was, even if they'd never met him. His photo had been on the cover of business magazines for decades. Daryl was still on his knee, still holding Nicole's hand, when he noticed the shift in the room's energy. Heads were turning, whispers growing louder. He followed their gaze to the doorway, and when his eyes landed on his father, the color drained from his face like water from a broken dam. The champagne flute slipped from Nicole's fingers, shattering against the marble floor in a sound that seemed to echo forever. Daryl slowly rose to his feet, his confident mask finally slipping to reveal the terrified boy beneath. "Dad," he whispered, though the word barely made it past his lips. Herbert stepped forward, his footsteps measured and deliberate. The police officers flanked him, their presence lending weight to whatever was about to unfold. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, sensing that something momentous was happening. "Hello, son," Herbert said, his voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "Congratulations on your engagement. Though I have to say the timing is interesting." Daryl's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Nicole's hand flew to her throat, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "I wasn't expecting you," Daryl managed to say. "I'm sure you weren't," Herbert replied. "But then, there are a lot of things you weren't expecting tonight, aren't there?" He reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope. "Daryl, do you know what this is?" Daryl shook his head, apparently struck mute. "This is the revised family trust. You see, the trust has always contained certain moral clauses, provisions that allow me to alter the terms if the primary beneficiary engages in behavior that brings disgrace to the family name." Herbert's voice grew cold. "Publicly humiliating your wife and children at your own anniversary party certainly qualifies." The implications hit Daryl like a physical blow. I watched him sway slightly, his face going from pale to green. "As of tonight," Herbert continued, "you are no longer the primary beneficiary of the Adams Family Trust. That honor now belongs to your wife and children, the people you've chosen to betray and humiliate." "Dad, please." "Furthermore," Herbert said, his voice cutting through Daryl's plea, "I've had my accountants do some investigating into your finances. Did you know that your joint credit cards have been used extensively by Ms. Nicole here? Spa treatments, shopping sprees, expensive dinners, all charged to accounts that she had no legal right to access." Nicole's face went white. "I didn't." Daryl said it was okay. "Apparently," Herbert replied. "But using another person's financial accounts under false pretenses has a legal term. It's called fraud." That's when the police officer stepped forward. "Nicole Sterling," one of them said, his voice official and stern. "You're under arrest for credit card fraud and identity theft." "No," Nicole screamed, backing away from the officers. "This is insane. Daryl, tell them. Tell them you gave me permission." But Daryl was staring at his father, his face a mask of absolute horror. "Dad, please, we can work this out. I'll call off the engagement. I'll go to counseling. It's too late for that," Herbert said quietly. "You made your choice, Daryl. You chose to betray the people who loved you most. Now you get to live with the consequences." The police officers moved forward, and Nicole tried to run. She made it about 3 steps in her stiletto heels before one of them caught her arm. As they read her rights, her perfectly styled facade finally cracked completely. "This is Ashley's fault," she shrieked, pointing at me with her free hand. "She planned this. She set us up." For the first time since the chaos began, all eyes in the room turned to me. I stood there in my emerald gown, my children pressed close to my sides, and met the gaze of every person in that ballroom. "Yes," I said simply, I did. The admission sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd, but I wasn't finished. For 4 months, my husband and my best friend have been having an affair, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room. For 4 months, they'd been planning to humiliate me and my children at this party, our anniversary party. They thought I was too naive, too trusting, too stupid to see what was happening right under my nose. I looked directly at Daryl, who was staring at me as if I were a stranger. They were wrong. Nicole was still screaming as the police officers led her toward the door, her voice echoing off the marble walls. I love him. We love each other. You can't destroy love. Love, I called after her, my voice cutting through her hysteria. Love doesn't involve destroying innocent children's lives. Love doesn't involve betraying the people who trust you most. What you two had wasn't love. It was selfishness and cruelty masquerading as romance. The ballroom fell silent, except for the sound of Nicole's heels clicking against the marble as she was escorted out. Daryl stood alone in the center of the room, his perfect tuxedo suddenly looking like a costume, his confident facade completely shattered. Ashley, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are, I replied. But sorry doesn't undo what you've done to our children. Sorry doesn't erase 4 months of lies and betrayal. Sorry doesn't give Pamela and Lawrence back their innocence, or their trust in their father. Herbert stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Ashley, the children are welcome to stay at the estate tonight if you'd prefer not to go home. I looked down at Pamela and Lawrence, both of whom were crying but trying to be brave. What do you think? I asked them quietly. Do you want to go to grandfather's house? Pamela nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Can we bring Elephant? She asked, referring to Lawrence's beloved stuffed animal. Of course we can, I assured her. As we prepared to leave, Daryl took a step toward us. Ashley, please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I said firmly. You made your choice, Daryl. You chose Nicole over your family. You chose your own selfish desires over your children's well-being. The explanation is simple. You're not the man I thought I married. The children, they need their father. They need a father who puts them first. They need a father who wouldn't destroy their sense of security for his own gratification. I gathered Pamela and Lawrence closer to me. You can see them when the divorce is final, when the custody arrangements are set. But right now, they need to be somewhere safe. Herbert had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Daryl, you should know, I've spoken with the partners at your law firm. They're not pleased about the scandal. Criminal charges against your fiancé don't reflect well on the firm's reputation. The final blow. Daryl's face went from pale to gray as the full implications hit him. Disinherited, his career in jeopardy, his reputation in ruins, his children traumatized, his wife lost forever. Ashley, he said one last time, his voice breaking. I love you. I've always loved you. I looked at him for what I knew would be the last time as his wife. If that's what you call love, Daryl, then I'm better off without it. Herbert escorted us toward the back exit, away from the remaining guests who were still processing what they'd witnessed. As we reached the door, I turned back for one final look at the ballroom. The roses were still perfect, their petals unmarked by the drama that had unfolded. The crystals still sparkled, the marble still gleamed. But everything else had changed forever. Daryl stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of the life he'd chosen to destroy. Some of the guests were leaving, their faces shocked and uncomfortable. Others lingered, perhaps hoping for more drama, or simply too stunned to move. Are you ready? Herbert asked gently. I nodded, taking my children's hands. We're ready. As we walked out into the cool night air, Pamela looked up at me with tear-stained cheeks. Mom. Yes, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. Lawrence nodded solemnly. Me too. You were really brave tonight. I squeezed their hands and smiled through my tears. We're all going to be brave from now on. We're going to be brave and strong and honest with each other. And we're going to be happy. Promise? Pamela asked. I promise. And for the first time in 4 months, I meant it completely. The house Herbert bought for us was smaller than the mansion Daryl and I had shared, but it was ours, truly ours. Light filled every room. and laughter echoed through the halls again. Pamela had painted her bedroom a soft lavender, while Lawrence had chosen deep blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when the newspaper arrived, folded neatly on our front step. The headline caught my eye immediately. Local attorney's license suspended following fraud scandal. The article was brief but damning. Daryl's law firm had terminated his partnership after Nicole's conviction for credit card fraud. The Bar Association had suspended his license pending a full investigation. His reputation, built over 15 years of practice, was in ruins. Nicole had been sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay full restitution. The article mentioned that she tried to claim the charges were politically motivated, part of a revenge plot by a vindictive ex-wife. The judge had been unimpressed. I folded the newspaper and set it aside without reading the rest. Their downfall was complete, but I took no pleasure in it anymore. Justice had been served, and that was enough. Pamela appeared in the kitchen, already dressed for school, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. At 14, she was becoming more independent, more confident. The therapy sessions we'd all attended had helped her process the trauma of that night. "Morning, Mom," she said, kissing my cheek. "Smells good. Blueberry pancakes. Your favorite." Lawrence thundered down the stairs, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his soccer cleats in his hand. He'd grown 3 inches in 6 months and was finally taller than some of his teammates. "Can I eat in the car?" he asked, grabbing a pancake from the plate. "Coach wants us there early for extra practice." "Sit down and eat properly," I said firmly. "Soccer is important, but breakfast is more important." He grumbled, but sat down, shoving bites of pancake into his mouth with the enthusiasm of a growing 12-year-old. "Are we still going to grandfather's for dinner Sunday?" Pamela asked. "Of course. He's making his famous lasagna." Herbert had become a fixture in our lives, the grandfather he'd never had the chance to be when Daryl was controlling the relationship. He picked the kids up from school twice a week, attended every soccer game and school play, and had become one of my closest advisors as I navigated single parenthood. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Daryl had been required to attend counseling and parenting classes before his supervised visitation rights were restored. He saw the children every other weekend now, their relationship slowly healing from the damage he'd caused. He tried to reconcile with me several times, showing up at the house with flowers and apologies. But the trust was gone, shattered beyond repair. The man who could plan to humiliate me and our children so publicly wasn't someone I could ever love again. "Mom," Lawrence looked up from his pancakes. "Tyler's parents are getting divorced too." He asked if it gets easier. I sat down beside him, choosing my words carefully. "What did you tell him?" I told him it does get easier, but it's different. Like, we don't have family game nights with Dad anymore, but we have movie nights with just us, and grandfather comes to my games now, which is pretty cool. And, Pamela added, I told him that sometimes parents think they want different things, but it's better for everyone to be honest about it. I looked at my children, these remarkable, resilient people who had survived their father's betrayal and emerged stronger. They understood now that love meant commitment, honesty, and putting family first. They understood that actions have consequences, but also that healing is possible. "I'm proud of both of you," I said, "for how you've handled everything, for how you've supported each other, for how you've grown." "We learned it from you," Pamela said simply. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Herbert. Ashley, would you be free for lunch today? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." I texted back, "Of course. Everything okay?" "More than okay. I have a proposition for you." After dropping the kids at school, I met Herbert at his favorite restaurant, not Chez Laron, which had permanently lost my business, but a small bistro downtown that served excellent coffee and didn't hold any painful memories. He was already seated when I arrived, reading what looked like legal documents. At 73, he was still sharp as ever, his silver hair perfectly styled, his presence commanding respect from everyone in the room. "Ashley," he stood to greet me, kissing my cheek. "You look wonderful." "Happy." "I am happy," I realized as I said it. For the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely happy. "Good. That's what I was hoping to hear. He gestured for me to sit. I have something to discuss with you. Herbert, if this is about money. It's not about charity, he said firmly. It's about business. I'm 73 years old, Ashley. I built an empire, but I won't live forever. I need someone I trust to help manage the foundation. Someone who understands what it means to fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I stared at him. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. The Adams Foundation needs a director of family services. Someone who can oversee our initiatives for women and children in crisis. The salary is substantial, the work is meaningful, and you'd be helping people who are facing situations similar to what you've been through. The offer took my breath away. Herbert, I'm flattered, but I don't have experience. You have the most important qualification. You understand what it means to fight for your children when the odds are stacked against you. You understand what it takes to rebuild your life after betrayal. That's worth more than any business degree. I thought about it, really thought about it. For 15 years, I'd been Daryl's wife, a role that had defined me completely. Then, I'd been the betrayed wife, the victim seeking justice. Now, I had the chance to be something else entirely, a woman who used her experience to help others. Would I be helping women like Nicole, too? I asked. Women who make terrible choices. Everyone deserves a second chance, Ashley. Even Nicole, when she gets out of prison, will need help rebuilding her life. The question is, are you strong enough to help people who might not deserve it? I thought about Nicole, sitting in a prison cell, her perfect life destroyed by her own greed and poor choices. I thought about Daryl, alone in a small apartment, his career and reputation in ruins. I thought about all the other women and children who found themselves in impossible situations, needing someone to fight for them. Yes, I said finally. I think I am. Herbert smiled, the first genuinely warm smile I'd ever seen from him. Excellent. When can you start? That evening, I told Pamela and Lawrence about the job offer over dinner. Their reactions were everything I could have hoped for. That's so cool, Mom, Lawrence said. You're going to help kids like us. Kids and their moms, I corrected. Families who need someone in their corner. Will you travel? Pamela asked. Because if you do, can we sometimes come with you during summer vacation? We'll see, I said, but I was already imagining the possibilities. A new life, a new purpose, a new way to define myself that had nothing to do with being someone's wife or a victim. That night, after the children were asleep, I stood in my bedroom, not ours, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different from the naive wife who had planned an anniversary party 6 months ago. This woman had steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. This woman had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not just intact, but stronger. I thought about all the women out there who were living my old life, trusting completely, loving unconditionally, never imagining that the person they'd given their heart to could destroy it so callously. I thought about the women who were discovering affairs, facing public humiliation, and wondering if they had the strength to fight back. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The words came easily, flowing from a place of hard-won wisdom and fierce determination. To the woman reading this in the dark, maybe you found this story at 2 a.m., unable to sleep because you discovered something that changed everything. Maybe you're sitting in your car in a parking lot, trying to decide whether to go home and pretend you don't know. Maybe you're wondering if you're strong enough to face what comes next. I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think. 6 months ago, I was you. I was the woman who thought her marriage was solid, who trusted completely, who never imagined that the person she loved most could orchestrate her public humiliation for his own selfish desires. I was the woman who felt naive, stupid, and utterly broken. But here's what I learned. Being betrayed doesn't make you weak. It makes you a survivor. The man who was supposed to protect me chose to destroy me instead. The woman who was supposed to be my closest friend helped him do it. They counted on my silence, my compliance, my willingness to suffer in private rather than fight back in public. They were wrong. You don't have to be a victim. You don't have to smile and pretend everything is fine while your world crumbles. You don't have to protect the people who are hurting you at the expense of protecting yourself and your children. I'm not going to lie to you. The road ahead is hard. There will be nights when you cry until you have no tears left. There will be moments when you question every decision you've made. There will be people who judge you for fighting back, who tell you to be the bigger person, or think of the children. But here's what they don't understand. Sometimes, being the bigger person means showing your children that actions have consequences. Sometimes, thinking of the children means teaching them that they deserve better than a life built on lies and betrayal. You are not responsible for fixing what someone else broke. You are not required to forgive someone who isn't truly sorry. You are not obligated to keep quiet about abuse, betrayal, or humiliation just to make other people comfortable. Your pain is valid. Your anger is justified. Your desire for justice is not vindictive. It's human. Find your allies. They might be where you least expect them. A former father-in-law who values integrity over blood relations. A sister who will help you plan your comeback. A lawyer who believes in fighting for what's right. Trust is hard when you've been betrayed, but there are still good people in the world who will stand with you. Document everything. Keep records. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. You're not paranoid. You're learning to protect yourself. Take care of your children, but remember that you matter too. You can't pour from an empty cup. Your healing is just as important as theirs. And showing them that you value yourself teaches them to value themselves. Most importantly, you are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by how you respond to it, how you rebuild, how you choose to move forward. I am free now in ways I never imagined possible. Free from the constant anxiety of wondering if I was enough. Free from the exhausting work of loving someone who didn't value that love. Free from the prison of a marriage built on lies. I wake up every morning in a house filled with laughter and honesty. My children have learned that love means respect, that family should be a safe space, that their mother is strong enough to protect them when it matters most. I have work that gives my life meaning, relationships based on mutual respect, and a future limited only by my own dreams. This is what freedom looks like after betrayal. Not the absence of scars, but the presence of strength. Not the absence of sadness, but the presence of hope. Not the absence of fear, but the courage to face whatever comes next. You have that courage inside you. You've always had it. Now you just need to let it out. The woman who planned to humiliate you at your own anniversary party underestimated you completely. Don't make the same mistake. You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you feel. You deserve better than what you've been given. And when you're ready to fight for it, you'll discover something magical. You've had the power all along. Fight back. Stand up. Speak your truth. The world is waiting to see what you'll do with your freedom. With love and solidarity, Ashley. I saved the document and closed my laptop, feeling lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow, I would start my new job helping other women and children find their way out of impossible situations. But tonight, I would sleep peacefully in my own bed, in my own house, surrounded by the quiet contentment of a life rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. In the morning, Pamela found me humming while I made coffee. "You seem different, Mom," she observed, stealing a piece of toast from my plate. "Different how?" "Happy. Like really happy. Not just pretending to be okay happy." I pulled her into a hug, this wise daughter who had learned too young that the world could be cruel, but had also learned that we could be stronger. "I am really happy," I told her. "For the first time in a very long time. I know exactly who I am and what I want to do with my life." "And what's that?" "Help other people discover that they're stronger than they think they are." Pamela smiled. "I like that. Can I help sometimes?" "Absolutely. We'll help them together." As she headed off to school, I looked around my bright, honest kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The anniversary party was 6 months behind me now, but in many ways, it had been the beginning of everything that mattered. The beginning of my real life, the beginning of my freedom, the beginning of becoming the woman I was always meant to be.